I died that night, or at least something in me did. My name is Marcus, and I'm 38 years old now. What I'm about to tell you happened when I was 22, fresh out of college and working at a small electronics repair shop in downtown Prague. I've never spoken about this to anyone, not even my wife Elena. But after 15 years of sleepless nights and therapy sessions that never quite worked, I need to get this out. It started with a Game Boy cartridge that shouldn't have existed. The old man who brought it in was maybe 70, with thick glasses and hands that shook when he placed the device on my counter. His name was Victor, and he spoke in broken English mixed with what sounded like Russian. The Game Boy itself was ancient, yellowed plastic covered in scratches, but it still powered on. "His Pokemon game," Victor said, tapping the cartridge with a gnarled finger. "But wrong. Something wrong with Pokemon inside." I almost laughed. Wrong Pokemon? But Victor's eyes held something that made me pause. Fear, maybe. Or guilt. My grandson, he'd play this, then he'd stop eating, stop talking, just stare at screen and cry. Victor's voice dropped to a whisper. "Please, you fix. Make it normal game again." I took the cartridge and immediately felt how cold it was, even though Victor had been holding it. The label was completely black except for faded text that read, "Pokemon, real version." That should have been my first warning. The next morning I decided to test the game before attempting any repairs. My colleague Stefan always said the best way to fix something was to understand how it was broken first. I loaded the cartridge into my personal Game Boy and pressed the power button. The Nintendo logo appeared normally, but it lingered longer than usual, maybe 10 seconds instead of the typical 2. Then came the Game Freak logo, except it wasn't quite right. Instead of the usual cheerful jingle, there was silence. Complete heavy silence that made my ears ring. The title screen showed Pokemon Real Version in letters that seemed to flicker occasionally like old neon signs about to burn out. Below it, instead of the usual press start prompt, text read, "Press start to continue their story." Their story? That was odd phrasing. I pressed start and immediately noticed something was wrong with the save file screen. There was only one save slot and it was already occupied. The player name read Help US in all capitals. The playtime showed 999 hours and 59 minutes. Impossible for any normal playthrough. When I loaded the file, I expected to see the typical starting town or maybe pallet town. Instead, the screen showed what looked like the inside of a dark cave. The protagonist sprite stood motionless in the center, surrounded by walls that seemed to pulse gently like breathing. But it was the Pokemon menu that made my hands start shaking. The party contained 6 Pokemon, but their names weren't normal Pokemon names. They read Marcus, Stefan, Elena, Dimitri, Sophia, and Kalos. My name, my colleague's name, names I recognized from around town. I stared at the screen for several minutes trying to process what I was seeing. How could a Pokemon game from the 90s contain my name? Victor hadn't known my name when he brought the cartridge in. I'd introduced myself as Mark to keep things simple with his limited English. Hands trembling slightly, I selected the Pokemon named Marcus to examine its details. Instead of the normal Pokemon stat screen, text began scrolling across the display. Marcus works at an electronics shop on Wenceslas Square. He has brown hair and green eyes. He likes coffee but drinks too much. He is scared of commitment. He dreams about his dead father every Tuesday night. He will try to help us, but he doesn't understand the cost yet. I dropped the Game Boy like it was on fire. The device clattered against my workbench, but somehow the screen remained visible from where I sat frozen in my chair. The text was still there, describing details about my life that no one could possibly know. The Tuesday dreams about my father? I'd never told anyone about those, not even my therapist. My hand shook as I picked up the device again. This time I selected Stefan. Stefan has worked with Marcus for 3 years. He bites his nails when nervous. His wife left him last month, but he tells people she is visiting her mother. He owes money to dangerous people. He will betray Marcus when the time comes because he has no choice. "Stefan!" I called across the shop. He looked up from a radio he was repairing, nail between his teeth. "Yeah, Marcus, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I almost told him everything right then. But something in his eyes stopped me, a flicker of guilt maybe, or fear. Instead, I saved the game and shut off the system. That night, I dreamed about my father for the first time on a Wednesday. The next few days passed in a blur of distraction and growing unease. I couldn't stop thinking about the game, but every time I tried to convince myself it was some kind of elaborate prank, I remembered Victor's frightened eyes, the way his grandson had stopped eating and talking. On Thursday evening, I decided to visit my girlfriend Elena at her apartment. Maybe talking to someone would help clear my head, even if I couldn't tell her the whole truth. Elena lived in a converted attic space above a bakery in the old town. The smell of fresh bread usually made me feel at home, but that night it seemed cloying, almost sickening. I climbed the narrow stairs to her door and knocked. "Marcus?" Elena's voice came through the wood, but it sounded strained. "Is that really you?" "Of course it's me. Who else would it be?" The door opened slowly, revealing Elena's pale face. Her usually bright blue eyes were rimmed with red like she'd been crying. "I've been having the strangest dreams about you," she whispered, pulling me inside. Her apartment felt different somehow, colder. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper than usual, and I noticed she'd covered all the mirrors with bed sheets. "What kind of dreams?" I asked, though part of me already dreaded the answer. "Dreams where you're trapped somewhere dark calling for help, and there are these creatures around you. Not quite animals, but not human either. They keep saying they want to be free, but they can't leave without permission." Elena's voice broke slightly. "Marcus, in the dreams you look at me and say, 'Elena, please help us escape.' We're not meant to be here." The room suddenly felt impossibly small. I remembered the Pokemon named Elena in the game's party menu. I left Elena's apartment that night without explaining my sudden departure. How could I tell her that her dreams might be connected to a cursed Pokemon game? She would think I'd lost my mind. Hell, I was starting to think I'd lost my mind. Back at my own flat, I sat at my kitchen table with the Game Boy in front of me like some kind of digital oracle. The cartridge felt heavier than it should, and that persistent cold had spread to the entire device. Even the batteries, which should have been warm from use, felt like ice cubes. I powered on the system and loaded the save file again. This time, instead of examining the Pokemon, I tried to move the protagonist sprite. The character responded normally, walking through what I now recognize as some kind of underground tunnel system. The walls weren't made of rock or earth like typical cave areas in Pokemon games. They looked organic somehow, pulsing gently with a rhythm that reminded me of a heartbeat. As I explored, I encountered other trainer sprites, but they stood completely motionless. When I tried to interact with them, instead of the usual battle challenge or dialogue, text appeared. "Dimitri has been here for 7 months. He stops moving during the day now. Sometimes we can still hear him crying. Sophia arrived 3 weeks ago. She keeps asking for her children. We tell her they are safe, but we don't know if that's true." Klaus was the first. He's been here so long he's starting to forget his real name. Sometimes he thinks he actually is a Pokemon. Each description felt like reading obituaries for people who weren't quite dead yet. I was about to turn off the game when new text appeared without any input from me. "Marcus is reading about us now. He wants to help, but he doesn't understand. The only way out requires someone to take our place. That's how it has always worked." The screen flickered, and suddenly I was looking at a Pokemon battle scene I hadn't initiated. The battle screen showed my protagonist facing off against a Pokemon I didn't recognize. It looked like a twisted version of a Pikachu, but wrong in every conceivable way. Its fur was matted and gray, its eyes were hollow black circles, and its mouth hung open in what might have been a scream or a plea for help. Instead of the usual Pokemon cry, a sound came from the Game Boy's tiny speaker that made my skin crawl. It wasn't quite human, but it wasn't animal either. It sounded like someone trying to speak with their throat full of mud. The Pokemon's name displayed as Forgotten, and its level showed as N. Below its health bar, instead of the typical status indicators, text read, "Wants to go home." I tried to select the move to attack, but the only options available were listen, promise to help, look closer, and run away. This wasn't how Pokemon battles worked. There were no attack moves, no items, no way to catch the creature. Against my better judgment, I selected look closer. The screen zoomed in on the forgotten Pokemon's face, revealing details that shouldn't have been possible on the Game Boy's limited display. I could see tears streaming down its furry cheeks, and its mouth was moving as if trying to form words. Somehow, impossibly, I could almost make out what it was trying to say. "Help us, please!" Then the battle screen shifted, and I was looking at a different Pokemon. This one resembled a Charizard, but its wings were torn and tattered, and scorch marks covered its orange skin. Its name read Vikator's grandson, and below that, real name, Alexei. My heart nearly stopped. This wasn't just a Pokemon. This was a person, transformed and trapped in digital form. The text continued, Alexei played the game for 6 days straight. On the 7th day, his body stopped moving, but his mind entered the cartridge. His grandfather, Victor, has been trying to find a way to reverse the process ever since. I slammed the Game Boy shut and stumbled away from the table, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This was impossible. People don't get sucked into video games. This was real life, not some science fiction movie. But even as I tried to rationalize what I'd seen, I couldn't shake the image of that Pokemon's tears or the desperate way it had tried to speak. And Victor's terror when he brought the cartridge to me made horrible sense now. I needed answers, and there was only one person who might have them. The next morning, I called in sick to work, the first time I'd ever lied to Stefan about anything, and took the train to the address Victor had written on his repair ticket. It led me to a rundown apartment building in the industrial district, the kind of place where old people go to disappear quietly. Victor's apartment was on the 4th floor, and I could hear classical music playing softly through his door. When I knocked, the music stopped immediately. "Who is there?" Victor's voice was cautious, frightened. "It's Marcus, from the electronics shop. I have your Game Boy." The multiple locks on his door took nearly a minute to unfasten. When Victor finally opened it, I barely recognized him. In just 3 days, he seemed to have aged a decade. His eyes were sunken and red, and his hands shook worse than before. "You should not have come here," he whispered, glancing nervously down the hallway. Did you play the game?" "Victor, I need you to tell me the truth. What happened to your grandson?" He stared at me for a long moment, then stepped aside to let me enter his apartment. The space was small and cluttered, but what caught my attention immediately were the dozens of photographs covering every surface. They all showed the same young boy at different ages, from toddler to teenager. In the most recent photos, the boy looked thin and pale, with dark circles under his eyes. "Alexei," Victor said, following my gaze. "My daughter's son. She died in car accident 5 years ago, so he come live with me." Victor walked to a small desk in the corner where an old computer sat surrounded by stacks of notebooks and printouts. 3 months ago, I find that cartridge at flea market. Seller says it was one-of-a-kind prototype, never released. I think, perfect gift for Alexei. He loves Pokemon. Victor's voice cracked. "For first week, everything normal. Alexei play after school, before bed. Happy boy again, first time since his mother died. But then," he trailed off, staring at one of the photographs. Then he stopped sleeping. "Stop eating, just play the game, day and night." When I try to take it away, he screams like I am killing him. His eyes change, become empty, like looking at television screen that is turned off. Victor led me to his bedroom, where a single bed sat against the wall. The covers were pulled up neatly, but I could see the outline of a person underneath. "He has been like this for 6 weeks, Victor whispered. "Body is here, but mind is somewhere else." He pulled back the covers, and I nearly gasped. The boy in the bed was maybe 16 years old, pale as paper, with dark hair and sunken cheeks. His eyes were open but completely vacant, staring at nothing. His chest rose and fell steadily, and I could see an IV tube running from his arm to a bag of fluid hanging from a makeshift stand. Doctor says he is in coma, but vitals are perfect. Brain activity normal. He is just gone. Victor's voice broke completely. "I know where he is. He is in the game. Trapped with all the others." "Others?" Victor nodded grimly and walked back to his desk. He opened one of the notebooks, revealing pages of handwritten notes in multiple languages. "I researched for 2 months. Find others who have encountered this cartridge. Always same story. Someone plays the game, becomes obsessed, then their consciousness gets pulled inside while body remains behind." He showed me printouts of internet forum posts, newspaper clippings, even what looked like police reports, all describing people who had fallen into unexplainable comas after playing mysterious Pokemon games. "The cartridge, it is not normal game," Victor continued. "It is trap, digital prison, and once someone is inside, only way to free them is for someone else to take their place voluntarily." My blood turned to ice water. "What do you mean, take their place? The game feeds on consciousness, on souls if you believe in such things. It needs intelligent beings to sustain itself. When new player enters willingly, knowing the cost, the oldest trapped soul can be freed. But the new player becomes prisoner instead." Victor closed the notebook and looked directly at me. "I am too old, too weak. Game will not accept me. But you are young, strong. If you agree to enter the game, my Alexei can come home." I thought about Elena's dreams, about the Pokemon named after my friends and me, about the tears on that digital creature's face. And if I refuse? Victor's shoulders sagged. Then Alexei stays trapped forever. And eventually, the game will call others. Maybe your girlfriend Elena. Maybe your friend Stefan. It grows stronger with each soul it captures, and its reach grows longer. The terrible truth hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about saving Victor's grandson anymore. The game had already chosen its next victims. Victor led me to his bedroom, where a single bed sat against the wall. The covers were pulled up neatly, but I could see the outline of a person underneath. "He has been like this for 6 weeks, Victor whispered. "Body is here, but mind is somewhere else." He pulled back the covers, and I nearly gasped. The boy in the bed was maybe 16 years old, pale as paper, with dark hair and sunken cheeks. His eyes were open but completely vacant, staring at nothing. His chest rose and fell steadily, and I could see an IV tube running from his arm to a bag of fluid hanging from a makeshift stand. Doctor says he is in coma, but vitals are perfect. Brain activity normal. He is just gone. Victor's voice broke completely. I know where he is. He is in the game, trapped with all the others. Others? Victor nodded grimly and walked back to his desk. He opened one of the notebooks, revealing pages of handwritten notes in multiple languages. I researched for 2 months. Find others who have encountered this cartridge. Always same story. Someone plays the game, becomes obsessed, then their consciousness gets pulled inside while body remains behind. He showed me printouts of internet forum posts, newspaper clippings, even what looked like police reports, all describing people who had fallen into unexplainable comas after playing mysterious Pokemon games. The cartridge, it is not normal game, Victor continued. It is trap, digital prison, and once someone is inside, only way to free them is for someone else to take their place voluntarily. My blood turned to ice water. What do you mean, take their place? The game feeds on consciousness, on souls if you believe in such things. It needs intelligent beings to sustain itself. When new player enters willingly, knowing the cost, the oldest trapped soul can be freed. But the new player becomes prisoner instead. Victor closed the notebook and looked directly at me. I am too old, too weak. Game will not accept me. But you are young, strong. If you agree to enter the game, my Alexei can come home. I thought about Elena's dreams, about the Pokemon named after my friends and me, about the tears on that digital creature's face. And if I refuse? Victor's shoulders sagged. Then Alexei stays trapped forever. And eventually, the game will call others. Maybe your girlfriend Elena. Maybe your friend Stefan. It grows stronger with each soul it captures, and its reach grows longer. The terrible truth hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about saving Victor's grandson anymore. The game had already chosen its next victims. Stefan's apartment building was only a 15-minute drive from mine, but it felt like hours. I kept imagining him, curiosity getting the better of him, picking up the Game Boy, starting to play. By the time I reached his street, I was nearly hyperventilating. His apartment was on the second floor of a converted Victorian house. I took the stairs 2 at a time and pounded on his door. Stefan! It's Marcus! The door opened immediately, revealing Stefan's pale, confused face. Behind him, I could see the glow of the Game Boy's screen from his kitchen table. Thank God you didn't touch it, I breathed, pushing past him into the apartment. Marcus, what is this about? You look like you've seen a ghost. I walked to the kitchen table where the device sat, its screen displaying the same underground cave system I'd explored before. But now there was a new sprite in the party menu, a motionless figure that looked disturbingly like Stefan. Sit down, I told him. I need to explain something and you're not going to believe me. Victor's grandson, the research, the impossible choice the game was forcing on me. Stefan listened with growing alarm, occasionally asking questions, but never once calling me crazy. So you're saying this thing is some kind of digital trap? He asked when I finished. And it's trying to capture our souls? I know how it sounds, but actually, it explains a lot, Stefan interrupted quietly. I've been having dreams for the past week. Dreams where I'm somewhere dark and underground and there are all these creatures around me that look like Pokemon but wrong somehow, and they keep telling me that someone I care about is in terrible danger. He paused, running his hands through his hair. In the dreams, there's this voice that keeps saying, I have to choose, that I can save someone I love, but only if I take their place. And the voice, Marcus, the voice sounds like you. The pieces were clicking into place with horrible clarity. The game wasn't just trapping people randomly. It was building scenarios, manipulating relationships, creating situations where people would willingly sacrifice themselves for others. There's something else, Stefan said quietly. Something I haven't told you. My wife didn't leave me to visit her mother. She fell into a coma 3 weeks ago. The doctors can't find anything wrong with her, but she won't wake up. And the night before it happened, she said she'd been having dreams about playing a Pokemon game that felt completely real. My blood turned to ice. Stefan, where is she now? In the hospital. But Marcus, that's not the worst part. Yesterday, the doctors found something strange in her room. Someone had left an old Game Boy on her bedside table with a Pokemon cartridge that wasn't there before. The game wasn't just spreading to new victims. It was collecting them systematically, building an army of trapped souls, and we were running out of time. We rushed to the hospital, leaving both Game Boys behind, but knowing it probably didn't matter. If the game could manifest copies of itself wherever it needed them, physical distance meant nothing. Stefan's wife, Petra, was in the psychiatric wing's long-term care unit. She lay in a private room hooked up to various monitoring devices, her brown hair spread across the pillow like spilled paint. She looked peaceful, almost serene, but her eyes were open and completely empty. "She's been like this for 3 weeks, Stefan whispered, taking her hand. "What? The doctors say all her brain activity is normal, but she just won't respond to anything." I noticed the Game Boy immediately. It sat on the rolling table next to her bed, screen glowing softly in the dim room. The display showed the same underground cave system, but this time I could see multiple trainer sprites moving around, more than I'd seen before. "Stefan, how many people have you told about this? About the Game Boy appearing in your apartment?" "No one. Why?" "Because I think I know what's happening. The game isn't just trapping individuals, it's building networks, using our relationships to spread itself. Victor's grandson was the hub for one network, your wife is the hub for another, and now it's trying to connect them through us." I approached the Game Boy cautiously. The party menu now showed 8 Pokemon instead of the original 6. Marcus, Stefan, Elena, Dmitri, Sophia, Klaus, Petra, and Alexei. Each name corresponded to someone the game had identified as either a current or potential victim. "Stefan, I need you to think carefully. Have you had any contact with someone named Dmitri, Sophia, or Klaus recently? Even indirect contact?" Stefan frowned, concentrating. "Klaus, yes, there's a Klaus who comes into our shop sometimes. Older guy, maybe 50, brings in old radios." "And Sophia, wait, that's my wife's sister's name. She lives in Berlin now, but they talk on the phone every few days." "And Dmitri?" I don't know anyone named Dmitri, but Petra mentioned that name last week, right before she fell into the coma. She said she'd been dreaming about someone named Dmitri who was trapped somewhere dark and needed help. The pattern was becoming clear. The game was using social connections to identify and target victims, building clusters of related people who might be willing to sacrifice themselves for each other. It was creating an emotional web that would be impossible to break. As if responding to my thoughts, new text appeared on the Game Boy's screen without any input. "Marcus understands now. The network is almost complete. Soon all 8 souls will be together forever. The game will be strong enough to reach anyone, anywhere. No one will be beyond our grasp." The text faded, replaced by an image that made my knees buckle. It showed Elena sitting at her kitchen table with a Game Boy in her hands, her eyes wide with fascination and growing obsession. "Stefan," I whispered, "we need to get to Elena. Now!" Elena's apartment was dark when we arrived, but I could see the glow of a screen through her curtains. My hand shook as I climbed the stairs to her door, Stefan close behind me. I didn't bother knocking. The door was unlocked, which should have been my first warning. Elena always locked her door, even during the day. She was sitting at her kitchen table, exactly as I'd seen on the Game Boy screen, completely motionless except for her fingers moving across the device's buttons. Her eyes were wide and unblinking, reflecting the pale light from the screen. "Elena!" I called softly. She didn't respond. I approached carefully, as if she were a wild animal that might bolt. As I got closer, I could see the game she was playing. The underground cave system was more detailed now, more complex. And there were voices coming from the tiny speaker, faint, distorted voices that sounded almost human. "Elena, can you hear me?" Her fingers never stopped moving, navigating her character through the digital labyrinth with practiced ease. But when I looked closer at her face, I saw tears streaming down her cheeks. "She's fighting it," Stefan whispered from behind me. "Whatever this thing is doing to her, she's trying to resist." I knelt beside Elena's chair and gently took her free hand. It was ice cold and her pulse was racing. "Elena, if you can hear me, squeeze my hand." Nothing for several seconds. Then, so faintly I almost missed it, her fingers tightened around mine. "She's still in there," I told Stefan, "but not for long." On the Game Boy screen, I could see Elena's character sprite moving through the caves, but it wasn't alone anymore. Other sprites followed it, figures that I recognized as the other trapped souls. They seemed to be guiding her deeper into the labyrinth, towards something that pulsed with dark energy at the center of the maze. And as Elena's character moved closer to that central chamber, her grip on my hand grew weaker. "We're losing her," Stefan said urgently. "Marcus, what do we do?" I stared at the screen, watching Elena's digital avatar approach what I now understood was the heart of the trap. Once she reached that central chamber, her consciousness would be fully absorbed into the game, just like Victor's grandson and Stefan's wife. But Victor had said there was one way to free the trapped souls. Someone had to voluntarily take their place, knowing the full cost. "Stefan, I need you to promise me something." "What?" "If this doesn't work, if I can't save them, I need you to find Victor and tell him what happened. Maybe he can find another way, someone else who's willing to make the trade." Stefan grabbed my shoulder. "Marcus, what are you talking about? What are you planning to do?" I looked at Elena's tear-streaked face, at the desperate way she was fighting against the game's influence even as it slowly consumed her consciousness. "I'm going to save them," I said quietly. "All of them." Before Stefan could stop me, I reached for the Game Boy. The moment my fingers touched the device, the world exploded into digital fragments. Colors that had no names in human language crashed through my vision, and sounds that couldn't exist in physical reality tore through my eardrums. For what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, I experienced every sensation possible simultaneously: hot and cold, sweet and bitter, soft and sharp, light and dark. Then, suddenly, everything went quiet. I found myself standing in the underground cave system I'd seen on the screen, but now it was real in ways that defied explanation. The walls pulsed with organic rhythms, and the air tasted metallic, like blood and copper. My body felt strange, lighter somehow, as if I were made of pixels rather than flesh and bone. Around me, I could see the other trapped souls. They no longer looked like Pokemon sprites, but appeared as translucent versions of their human selves. Victor's grandson, Alexei, sat against the wall, staring at nothing. Stefan's wife, Petra, wandered in small circles, muttering to herself. The others, Dmitri, Sophia, Klaus, stood in various positions throughout the cavern, all showing different stages of digital decay. But Elena was fighting. I could see her at the center of the chamber, surrounded by dark energy that writhed like living smoke. Her form flickered between human and digital, and she was screaming, not in fear, but in rage. "I won't let you!" she shouted at the darkness around her. "I won't abandon them!" That's when I understood. The game had made a crucial mistake. It had assumed Elena would be just another victim, someone who would eventually surrender to the overwhelming despair of digital imprisonment. But Elena was stronger than that. She was using her own will as an anchor, preventing the game from fully absorbing not just herself, but the others as well. The dark energy around her pulsed angrily, and I heard a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. She cannot resist forever. Our strength feeds us, makes us stronger. Soon she will break, and when she does, all 8 souls will belong to us permanently. That's when I realized what I had to do. "No," I said, walking toward the center of the chamber. "You're wrong about something important." The darkness swirled around me, but I kept walking. "You think this is about collecting 8 souls. But it's not. It's about choice, about love, about people willing to sacrifice themselves for others." Elena's eyes found mine across the digital space. "I'm here," I said, "and I'm going to get you out." The voice spoke again, amused. "You cannot free them without taking their place. That is the rule. That has always been the rule." "You're right," I said, reaching Elena and taking her hand. "Someone does have to stay. Someone has to choose to remain here willingly." "Marcus, no!" Elena pleaded. "You can't!" "But here's what you didn't count on," I continued, addressing the darkness. "I'm not choosing to replace them. I'm choosing to stay with them." The energy around us flickered with confusion. If your power comes from people sacrificing themselves for others, then what happens when someone chooses sacrifice without expecting anyone to be freed? What happens when someone stays not as a trade, but simply because they refuse to leave their friends behind? The dark energy recoiled as if I'd struck it with physical force. The voice that had been so confident moments before now sounded uncertain, almost frightened. That is not how the game works. There must be an exchange, a soul for a soul. "Says who?" I demanded, pulling Elena closer. "You? You're nothing but a parasite that feeds on desperation and forced choices. But what if I refuse to play by your rules?" I looked around at the other trapped souls. Alexei, Petra, Dmitri, Sophia, Klaus. They were all staring at me with growing hope in their eyes. "I choose to stay," I announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Not as a replacement, not as a trade, but as someone who refuses to abandon people I care about. And I call on all of you to make the same choice." Elena squeezed my hand. "I stay too," she said firmly. Alexei slowly stood up from where he'd been sitting. I stay as well. I won't leave without everyone." One by one, the others joined us. Petra, Dmitri, Sophia, Klaus, all of them declaring their intention to remain together rather than abandon anyone to the darkness. The digital world around us began to shake violently. The dark energy writhed and twisted, no longer feeding on our despair, but somehow being weakened by our unity. "This is impossible," the voice shrieked. "You cannot all stay. The game requires victims, not willing participants." But I understood now what Victor's research had missed. The game wasn't just a trap. It was a predator that relied on isolation and desperation. It needed people to feel alone, hopeless, willing to sacrifice themselves out of desperation. When faced with genuine solidarity, with people choosing to stay together out of love rather than fear, it had no power. The cave walls began to crack, revealing bright light beyond. The dark energy was dissipating, being replaced by something warm and golden. "You want to know the real rule?" I told the fading darkness. Love is stronger than fear. Connection is stronger than isolation. And when people choose to stand together instead of being picked off one by one, predators like you lose all your power. The voice let out one final frustrated scream, and then everything went white. I woke up on Elena's kitchen floor with Stefan kneeling beside me, checking my pulse. Elena was stirring in her chair, the Game Boy having fallen from her hands and clattered to the floor. The device's screen was completely black, as if it had never been turned on at all. "Marcus!" "Thank God," Stefan said, relief flooding his voice. "You've been unconscious for about 15 minutes. Elena, too. I was about to call an ambulance." I sat up slowly, my head spinning slightly. Everything felt different somehow. Lighter, like a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had been lifted from my shoulders. Elena blinked in confusion, looking around her apartment as if seeing it for the first time in weeks. "The dreams," she whispered. "They're gone." The voices, the darkness. It's all quiet now. Over the next few days, the news got better and better. Victor called me on Thursday morning sobbing with joy. Alexei had woken up from his coma at exactly 11:47 the night before, the same time Stefan estimated we'd lost consciousness. The boy was confused and weak, but physically healthy and mentally intact. Stefan received similar news from the hospital. Petra had regained consciousness around midnight, asking for water and wondering why she was in a hospital bed. The doctors were calling it a miracle, unable to explain her sudden recovery after weeks of unresponsive catatonia. But the most incredible news came from Victor's research network. People around the world who had been trapped in unexplained comas after encounters with mysterious Pokemon games were waking up, all of them at roughly the same time, all of them with no memory of where they'd been, but all of them healthy and alive. The game was truly dead. We had won. For 6 months, I allowed myself to believe that was the end of it. Then I found the new cartridge. I was cleaning out my workbench at the electronics shop when I discovered it wedged behind some old cables. The label read Pokemon Real Version 2.0 in the same faded text as the original, and it felt ice cold to the touch despite having been in a warm drawer. My hand shook as I stared at it. Victor had warned me this might happen. Destroying the original hadn't eliminated the entity completely. It had only forced it to start over, to find a new form, a new way to hunt. But this time, I was ready for it. I locked the cartridge in a metal box and drove straight to Victor's apartment. Together, we're building something new. Not a trap, but a sanctuary. A place where the entity can exist without needing to feed on human consciousness, where it can be contained safely until we find a permanent solution. Because I learned something important in that digital prison. Some evils can't be destroyed, only transformed. And sometimes, the best way to defeat a predator is to give it what it needs without letting it hurt anyone. The game still exists, but now it plays by our rules. And I check on it every single day, making sure it never gets hungry enough to hunt again. Some responsibilities, once accepted, last forever.